Let's go over what is needed to create this word guessing game. We will create a class that represents our data, and we will manage that data through our state notifier. We will use RiverPod hooks throughout to create the state notifier, and we will use it in our widgets to display this data. We will then show how to watch for changes in our widgets so they automatically adjust to changes, eliminating the need for any stateful widgets. We will show how to avoid using stateful widgets, as well as pulling our logic out of the widgets themselves. This removes any need for maintaining state in our widgets and/or passing functions and data between widgets. Let's create a new project called Guess Word. There are two packages we need to bring into our pubspec file for this project. The first is Hooks RiverPod, which will be the state notifier provider we'll be using throughout the project. The second is auto-size text that we'll be using in some of our widgets for display purposes. Inside our main file, we cleaned up our My App widget and our returning a material app. We added a theme section and are just returning a primary swatch of blue. Under the scaffold, we created a simple app bar with a title of Guess Word and a body of a simple container. Now let's add our RiverPod Hooks package. This will allow us to wrap our app in a provider scope, which gives us access throughout our app to our state notifier, which we'll be configuring later. Let's create our class that will represent our data behind the scenes. We will create a new folder called models, and in that folder, we'll create a file called games_model. Now let's create our class. Our class name will be game, and we'll create the constructor as well. We have 4 variables. We start with a list string, which is our initialized game word, a list string of our guessed word letters, so these will be the letters we've already guessed, bool, which is the game is marked as 1, and bool as initialized. Again, our initialized game word is a list of all the letters that make up the word we're trying to guess. We have a list of our guessed letters as it runs through it, and then as we win the game, we have a bool called game1. Lastly, let's create a factory called game.empty, which just returns a game that has basic initialized values. Let's start by creating a controllers folder, and then in that folder, let's create a file called game_controller. In this file, we're going to create our state notifiers. So let's import the packages we need, followed by creating our initial class game controller. Our game controller extends state notifier and has a type of game. Our constructor creates the game controller with the initial value of game.empty. Our functions begin with our initializer, which starts a new game. Game world revealed returns the game word with the correct letters. Guess letter updates the state with our new letter that is guessed. Check if wins just validates if the user has won the game. And lastly, print state is for us to view the current state of our controller. Let's build out the initializer. First, we'll create a list of words that can be passed into the initializer. We will start with one word to make this easy to test with. Let's shuffle the words and then split the word into individual letters. We do this by first converting the string to uppercase, and then we call the split command. Now we can store those letters in the initialized game word as we create a new game. Set this equal to state, and then add print state at the bottom so we can see what our initialized state is. Building out print state is pretty easy. Debugs print to our command line, and we're going to print out the state of the initialized word, the guessed letters, and if the game's been won or not. Now let's use our state in our game world revealed. We are going to show only revealed letters in our game word. Let's start by assigning a variable with what our state of the initialized word is. Now we're going to generate another list that matches the same size, but we're going to replace all the letters with dashes. Now let's just walk through the word and replace the dashes with the words we've already guessed so we can reveal our word and then return our word. Let's move on to guess letter. This takes a single letter and we add it to our list of guessed letters. First, let's create a list of all our previous guesses from the state. Now we want to just check that state and make sure that we haven't already guessed this letter. If so, just return. Now we can add this letter to that list, expanding our list of guessed letters. And now we want to update state, so we update that state inside of our function. Now we go ahead and check if this is a winning guess, so call the function check if guess wins. And we can also add in a print state function here just for troubleshooting purposes. With the function check if guess wins, we want to see if the user has won the game. We will do this by setting game1 to true. Then we will compare each letter in our initialized word against our list of guessed letters. If there is a letter in our initialized word that is not in our guessed letters, we know that the game one state is false. Then we just update our state accordingly. Lastly, we need to create an instance of our game controller for us to use in our app. We will create a state notifier provider of type game controller that returns a game. We can use this instance of game controller throughout our app. Now, let's move on to our widgets. Let's start with the game body, which will be the main screen for our game. First, we need to import the hooks and material packages, as well as our game model and our state notifier. The widget type is going to be a consumer widget called game body. The difference between a standard stateless widget and a consumer widget is in the widget ref. This allows us to reference our state provider inside the widget itself. There are two ways we can use the state provider. One is to read the state provider, which we'll show later, and the other is to just watch. Watch means that we're looking for updates and listening for any changes in state. First, we're going to create a column of widgets that we can separate into other files to make them easier to maintain, and also show some of the beauty of using a state notifier. The first component will be the button to initialize our game. I will create our new component widgets in a component folder. The widget will be Game Start Button. It needs access to the same packages, models, and state notifiers. We will then create a simple consumer widget with an elevated button. On the onPressed function, we will call ref.readGameController.notifier. This gives us access to the functions underneath, and we will call the initializer function. When pressed, this will call the initializer function and initialize the state. Let's also change the label on the button for either a new game or a restart, depending on the status of the game. This will require us to watch the game controller to see if the game's actually won. Since we're going to put multiple components into our body, let's create a simple file that allows us to import them all with just one file. Now we can add this to our game body and add our button. Now if we come back over to our main, let's add our body. We have a new game, let's hit restart, and you'll notice that we print out our state as well below. We can hit restart again, and again it will print out our state. So let's go back to look at the completed app and figure out what else we need to do. So we have our word section up here that's hidden. We have a text field box to accept letters. And then we have another line down here that shows us the letters we've already guessed. So let's go ahead and put a few more of these widgets together. Draw game word shows the game word we are trying to guess with the correct guesses revealed. We will be using the game controller notifier function game word revealed to populate our widget. To create this display, we are going to use a list view builder. Our item count is going to be the game.initializedWord.length. And then the widget builder will be a simple text widget that we iterate through. Our next widget is our guess letter widget. This widget will also be a consumer widget, so it will need access to our state notifier. It is not going to be watching for the state, however, and we will only use state notifier to update a letter. We need a text editing controller that we can set the text to empty. We will start by creating a centered row, and in that row we will center our widgets. Next, we'll add a text widget, followed by a text field widget. The text field widget needs to be constrained with a sized box to begin with. The text field widget will only accept a single letter, so we need to make sure it's appropriately sized. We will also do some formatting of the text field, but a couple of the key areas to focus on here are the autofocus is set to true, and then the logic will be put into the onChanged function. In the logic, we are going to take a look at what is entered, and we need to validate that the characters we receive are only letter characters. So we create this regex object and we run it through and make sure that it's a letter that we get. If that is true, then we run it through and add it to our guess letter through our state notifier using our add guess letter function. Lastly, we have to set the controller text back to empty so that we are ready for the next letter. To display the guessed letters, let's create another widget that will display all the letters. However, let's go back to our controller and format the letters before we print them out. Let's create a new function called getFormatedGuessedLetters that will spit out a string of our letters in alphabetical order. So all we're going to do is take our list of strings, we're going to sort them so they're in alphabetical order, then rejoin them into a single string. Let's create our new consumer widget called Guessed Letters. Import the appropriate packages. This is another consumer widget. It's pretty straightforward. We will just bring in a string called guessed letters text, and we'll use that new get formatted guessed letters function to bring back that string. The only difference here is we are going to create a centered sized box, and then we're going to bring in our auto size text, and we're going to wrap that guessed letter text in that auto size text. That way, when the list gets really long, it adjusts appropriately size-wise to fit in that box. This last widget we create is the game-winning widget. This is just a very simple stateless widget that returns some text to the screen. We are only going to show this widget when the user has won. This is a very simple example of what we could do, and I'll show you how to trigger it in a minute, but this could be replaced with a lot of complex other solutions like confetti or a dialog box or whatever you want to do. Now let's also go back to our components and make sure that all of our files are exported in that one file. Now let's put this all together in our game body. We will add all of our widgets into the existing column in the order we want. First, we want to display the word we are guessing using the draw game word widget. Next, we have the input for our new guess, followed by the guessed letters we've already guessed. Now, let's show how we're going to display this game 1 widget. First, we're going to create a Boolean, and then we're going to test the conditions with the game to see if we actually have won the game. If so, then our condition is true. So we show winning widget. If it's true, we will display the game winning widget. If it's false, we'll just display an empty box. Okay, now that we're done with our code, let's fire this up. Hit new game. There's a little bit off here. Let's type in a letter. And we're typing in letters, but it's not showing up. But we can tell by our print state that it's actually registering the letters. So the good thing we're seeing here is that by separating out these individual widgets, we can troubleshoot them one at a time. It looks like when we go into our game draw, we have the wrong horizontal axis. So when we say scroll direction, we're going to say axis horizontal. Let's also do shrink wrap true. Resave this and reset. New game. There we go. Much better. However, now we're still not seeing our guessed words. So it looks like our guessed words has been added this const to it. So let's get rid of these consts and resave here. Refresh. Now if we hit new game and we do, there we go. Now our letters are starting to show up. And if we win, we have you have won. Our game now is complete. As always, the code is up on the GitHub, and if you found this useful at all, please like and subscribe. Thanks again.